It's amazing to think back on what happened 4 years ago this week. On the 13th of March 2020, we sent a message to all our community members explaining how this thing called COVID-19 was going to transform our community. And we were very clear that we weren't closing the temple, we were just going to be changing the way we related to everyone. And we introduced this thing called Zoom to our members. 2 days later, we closed the temple office doors so that people couldn't come in. Although I will say, it's worth everyone knowing that our extraordinary executive director, Wendy, stayed in the office by herself every single day during COVID to make sure the phones were answered. On the 15th of March 2020, which is 4 years ago today, I also sent a message to individuals who were helping with pastoral care, and I said this in an email. Although we've been deliberately optimistic with temple messaging and said that we're thinking about the end of March and then beyond, let's assume that the social distancing will need to happen for 4 to 6 weeks as a minimum to allow us to plan ahead just in case. 4 to 6 weeks. That was us being conservative. The schools had said that they're going to close for 3 weeks and then assume everyone would come back. We said 4 to 6 weeks just in case. It's extraordinary how optimistic we were, how convinced we were that science would save us and quickly, even though there's never been a pandemic in history that's been over within 6 weeks. Our community stepped up, and I will always be really proud of the way we stepped up. Rabbi Jenny, who was the interim associate rabbi at the time, led online meditation sessions. She co-wrote with me a commentary on Pirkei Avot, and we sent out a commentary on a sugya a day to over 70 people. And she also put together a really large presentation for the board on how we might best respond to COVID-19. Rabbi Nachum, who was our scholar in residence at the time, stepped up and led a weekly session on a chapter of his book each week. Joy Rosenberg, who was the director of education at the time, led 2 weekly sessions, one for youngsters and one for adults, different educational sessions. And I led some spirituality sessions as well. The idea was that we would continue to reach out to members at least once a day. And in terms of education, Ellen Zieselman, our youth director, continued to meet with the kids, the Hochberg Academy kids online. And after a while, our religious school moved entirely online as well. But it took months and continued all the way, not just past 4 to 6 weeks. Suddenly we were looking ahead to the summer and realized that this was going to affect summer. All the students who had plans, summer camps and so on, were going to be cancelled. They were going to be stuck at home. We knew there were immediate pastoral needs with some of these students. And so we created something which, again, I remain very proud of, that we did for 2 years called It Takes a Village, where members of our community, not just staff members, but also volunteers, lay leaders from our community, stepped up and led sessions on Zoom, even though we were all pretty much brand new at Zoom. And there was pottery, and there was art, and there was poetry writing, there was drama. I led a weekly session on how to paint miniatures. And each person leading the session would provide the materials. So when it was pottery materials were provided for each student who would come, and their parents would pick them up, or their guardians would pick up the pottery, take it home, and then they would do the pottery on Zoom at the same time. And we helped support kids throughout the summer with this extraordinary program called It Takes a Village. There was everything. There were dialogues, there were conversations, there was education. It was brilliant. Our community really stepped up. And when it became clear that the High Holy Days were going to be affected, that's when we had to really transform things. Our Shabbat morning services and Kabbalat Shabbat services had already adapted very quickly. Rabbi Jenny created an entire series of slides so that people who were new to Zoom could see the service, the liturgy on the screen, and see me in a little box in the corner, or see her leading the service in the corner, so that people didn't have to look down at their siddur. And so we already had a very different experience of prayer at that time. But with the High Holy Days, that was a whole other matter, because that's a lot of liturgy. And the Union for Reform Judaism actually provided us with the liturgy. And some members of our community, particularly Aaron, Meredith, Andre, Fred, and others, helped provide music. Literally came together, recorded music, and we embedded it into slides. It was extraordinary. And members gathered together and shared how powerful the High Holy Days were. We were very scared, very nervous about how people would respond having their first High Holy Days separated. But the number of people who emailed to share how much they enjoyed the Erev Rosh Hashanah service because they could sit in the service at home in their pajamas sipping margaritas was amazing, extraordinary. I had no idea so many people drank margarita in our community. And when it came to the Yom Kippur service, it was a real challenge to create that really strong feeling, but we got through it together. We even had the study sessions together, the discussions together. We had separate links. I remember on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, the entire streaming service that all synagogues were using went down for an hour. But our members were patient, they understood. I was leading a service without knowing that nobody was watching for a long time. But then people were able to join and gathered. Yom Kippur ended. It was an extremely emotional time for me to lead a service in an empty sanctuary to a screen. And I definitely shed a tear at the end of that service, that being the loneliest service I'd ever led. But our community remained strong. We supported each other, not just educationally, not just spiritually, but also pastorally as well. And eventually we formed a reopening committee with the idea of how do we bring people back safely. And again, I'm really proud of the way that we did this. We gathered together people of very different perspectives about COVID-19. From those who wanted us to open everything immediately to those who wanted us to stay closed for as long as possible. And it was like a microcosm of our community. It was a really powerful conversation that we kept having. And we slowly pushed the boundaries, slowly brought people back into services, slowly ensured that we went from social distancing and masking to more and more people being able to be physically in services. And eventually the reopening committee became the COVID-19 committee. And it still continues today, which is important, because COVID-19 continues. And in fact, recently, there's been an uptick in cases. It's more transmissible at the moment than it was a few years ago. It's just the effect of the most recent strains seems to be less at the moment. And so that committee continues. We really stepped up as a community. We really held each other together. We put aside any differences that we had. We knew that we were going through something unique, that we were experiencing something, that we were all treading water, that we were all exhausted. I want to thank Michelle Laflamme-Charles, who was president at the time, who was on the phone with me every single day so that we could plan things together. Lisa Adelman took over, and again, as president, again, as the community started drawing together, we were able to work together to find out what do we need now, because our community's needs have changed. More and more of our members are watching services online because they got used to it. And in some sense, I think that's a lovely thing. I do miss seeing as many people in the sanctuary. I do miss the sound, the volume of so many people, although we do still get a good number of people in services. At the same time, I often get photos from members on a Friday night. They email them to me. Here's our Shabbat table, and here's the service, your service being streamed. I think it's rather lovely that people are accessing our services while having Shabbat dinner. And we're also gathering together, and we're still gathering together in person. And I just want to thank our community. I want to thank everyone who helped us keep going during those really challenging times. When information was changing constantly, when people were saying, we must open immediately, we must not open at all. The fact that people were able to come together and hear each other's perspectives and find a balance remains something I'm very proud of as a community. To me, we were a community, especially during COVID, who listened to each other, who supported each other, who recognized the unique moment that we were in. And so we continue to provide educational offerings, sometimes in person, sometimes online. We continue to stream our services and encourage people to join us in the sanctuary and to join us online if you need. And we continue to reach out to adapt to our community's ever-changing needs. For me, it's very powerful to just pause for a moment, to reflect on where we were, to reflect on the enormity of the challenge that we faced, and to be able to say, we did it. We did it together. We supported each other together. I've mentioned a lot of staff. There's one other staff member I must mention, Faith. Faith, who continually provided support for me and then for Cantor Liana as well throughout the most intense period of the pandemic. All of us together, staff, lay members of the community, all of us helped each other. We have remained strong. Ever since then, we've remained together, we listen to each other, we learn from each other, we grow from each other. And I am very blessed to be rabbi of this community. I'm very blessed to be surrounded by so many people who help support each other. We really are an extraordinary community. And I think it's important 4 years on to just pause and reflect on how wonderful this community is. I invite you to join us either in person or online this evening for our Kabbalat Shabbat service. It's Women's Shabbat. The service is led entirely by women. Our Torah study tomorrow is on Zoom only because we have a bat mitzvah ceremony. I really encourage you to, if you are able to be in our sanctuary to support our bat mitzvah as she grows into an adult in the community. She, as with all of our students, is wonderful. Her drush, as with all of our students, is really insightful. I really hope that you'll be able to join us for that. So I wish you Shabbat Shalom. And once again, I thank you and thank everyone in our community who had patience, who bore with us through the most difficult times, and who continue to help us grow and develop our community today. I wish you Shabbat Shalom.